In today's video, I'm going to be looking at an article that features some of the ideas from Peter Fenwick. Dr. Peter Fenwick is one of the biggest researchers on consciousness and the near-death experience phenomenon. He's been in the field of neuropsychology for 50 years, more or less. You can find publications, books. I go a little bit into it in the article, but after all of this research, his theory, his idea is that consciousness exists outside of the brain as something like gravity. It's a property of the universe. It's something that we can conceive as real, and what the brain does is that the brain is a filter. So I thought this article would be a great introduction into something that I'm going to be looking in the future, which is the theories and the evidence that the brain is a filter and that consciousness exists outside of the brain. But I thought this article would be a great introduction. This is gonna be in the playlist Pragmatic Philosophy. This does not have a specific research to it, but I do mention the research and I feature it, and this is the purpose of Pragmatic Philosophy, to look at all of the research and to come to conclusions out of that research on consciousness that we currently have today. Now, the article asks the question, does consciousness exist outside the brain? It talks about some of what Peter Fenwick thinks about it and his conclusions, and it ends up with the statement saying that we do not have empirical evidence of this, so this is more faith than science, quote unquote. This article was written in 2019, but I make an argument at the end, and I ask to everyone, do we really not have evidence of this? And I think the last 2-3 years have been huge in terms of research on consciousness and psychedelics. I'm going to be linking everything below, everything that are pertinent and everything that I've been looking into in recent videos, and most importantly some of the research from Christopher Timmerman saying that when people go into the psychedelic experience, they go into the lowest brain waves that a human being can have, which means that there is no brain activity when they are having these transcendental experiences, which are the most important experiences they ever had in their life, according to some of what they say, these inconceivable experiences. And this happens when the brain is not active. So how can the brain create these experiences when the brain is not active? As I make the argument, I think we are starting to have this empirical evidence, and depending on how you look at it, and depending on the future development of the research in the next few years, I think we are really close to, as it is stated in the article, a framework to understand the fact that consciousness exists outside of the body, outside of the brain. Hence, consciousness exists after death. Hence, there is life after death. Before I move forward, I would like to remind you that if you want to join the growing discussion on consciousness and would like to be notified on the latest scientific discoveries and theories surrounding this topic and how they connect to ancient mythologies and philosophies, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, as I'll try to upload at least one video per week as I continue with the outline. Alright, so as mentioned, I'm going to be going into this article today. I found it on Psychology Today. This is a mainstream media sort of blog site where all news and psychology are put on or something. These specific videos, I said I'm gonna put it on Pragmatic Philosophy because I thought it was a good introduction to something that I've talked in the past and I'm starting to approach, and I'm gonna be looking into in the future, and that is the brain filter hypothesis, the brain filter theory, which is the idea that consciousness exists outside of the brain. Does consciousness exist outside of the brain? That is the question for this article. Consciousness actually a property of the universe, like gravity or light? This is what some of the new researchers are starting to put forward. The question of it's not just a non-physical thing. It's some sort of a property, a thing that we have to look in some sort of a semi-physical way, in the how do we call it real if it's not physical? If it's energy, it's still real. It's just not physical. It's kind of complicated, but I've seen some other research papers on this and treating it like it's something real because we have enough evidence to start formulating these ideas. So the consensus in neuroscience is that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain and its metabolism. So when people die, when the brain dies, consciousness ceases to exist. This is the common consensus that we have in our modern materialist science. But according to decades-long research of Dr. Peter Fenwick, a highly regarded neuropsychiatrist who has been studying the human brain, consciousness, and the phenomenon of near-death experience for 50 years, this view is incorrect. Despite initially being highly incredulous of NDEs and related phenomena, Fenwick now believes his extensive research suggests that consciousness persists after death. I didn't even put this in. In fact, Fenwick believes that consciousness actually exists independently and outside of the brain as an inherent property of the universe itself, like dark matter and dark energy or gravity. Now, this is what a lot of people are coming to the conclusion of. We have some interesting information about it. So who is Dr. Peter Fenwick? Not to appeal to authority, but I think everybody who is studying the research, is going into the research of consciousness, should know and should be familiar with the work of Dr. Peter Fenwick. Just go Google Peter Fenwick, go YouTube Peter Fenwick and look at the lectures, look at everything. I'm just gonna go quickly. If you go to Wikipedia, there's nothing here, it's just about his credentials. You can see a lecturer at King's College London, consultant Institute of Psychiatry, consultant neuropsychologist, both Maudsley and John Radcliffe hospitals. His mental group at the University of Southampton, holds visiting professorship at Reiki Neuroscience Institute in Japan. He's part of the AWARE project as well, the Human Consciousness project with Sam Parnia. He's part of that consensus statement that I've spoken about before. Everything is here. You can go into some of his work. If you go to ResearchGate and you look at the publications from Peter Fenwick, it's 218 publications. He's been talking a lot about this, and it's not only it has epilepsy and all these different studies. He's one of the main researchers on the near-death experience and unconsciousness. People who are looking into this should be familiar with Peter Fenwick. Now, this is the last research study that I'm going to be looking into in the future. Commentary, enhanced interplay of neuronal coherence and coupling in the dying human brain. This is about that man who unfortunately passed away while he was having an EEG exam. They were conducting an EEG exam on him, and he had a heart situation, and they were able to record a dying human brain. This was nothing that they did on purpose, but it just happened. But it actually brought a lot of information, and they're looking into it. So these are some of the most important researchers on consciousness: Pim Van Lommel, Bruce Grayson, and Peter Fenwick. I'm going to be looking into this in the future. He is part of that. I have a video on this. I'm going to link it somewhere on the screen, of that incident that happened and what it tells us about what's happening in the human dying brain at the moment of death. It's very interesting, and it's part of all these theory that I'm also developing. And he's also part of that consensus statement research that I made a video about as well. I'm going to link it somewhere on the screen. If I'm not able to link it on the screen, it's always on the description. I've been linking these videos for a while because they're very important. This is 2022, May 2022, February 2022. This year is 2022. This is the newest research on consciousness. When we go into this article, this is 2019, and later in the conclusion they say no, there's no science about it. But yes, there is science about it, and we're starting to understand that the science is aligning with the theories, which is something that I'm really excited about, because it goes beyond to what we understand what we are as human beings. So all the research right here, you can go into it if you're really interested. As I said, this is going to be on the playlist Pragmatic Philosophy, not on ongoing research. The playlist ongoing research is always going to have a research study, a publication attached to it. This one does not have it, because I also want to talk about in this channel, what do we do with all of the information? What do we do with all of the publications, with the research? How do we process it? What conclusions can we arrive from it? And it's part of it. So, in Fenwick's view, the brain does not create or produce consciousness, rather it filters it. They go into giving some examples how the eye filters in terms of a very small sliver of electromagnetic spectrum, and the ear registers a narrow range of sonic frequencies and so on and so forth. The same thing. So just how our eyes, they cannot see everything, our ears cannot register everything, but what we consciously interpret is only for a narrow range of what's actually happening. Goes on, well, we can't actually see much of the electromagnetic spectrum. We know things like X-rays, infrared radiation, microwaves exist because we have instruments for detecting them. Otherwise, we wouldn't even know about the world of microbes or particles if we didn't have the tools to see them. We wouldn't believe in these things, but now we have the technology to see them. So now we know that there are things that we don't understand but actually exist out there. So the idea is when the eye dies, the eye is no longer viable. The energy it previously interacted with remains nonetheless. So the fact that you cannot see it because the eye died, it doesn't mean that when you don't see and you don't hear anymore, things cease to exist. They remain somewhere. And the idea is that consciousness is the same thing. It only ceases to be in the now dead brain but continues to exist independently of the brain as an external property of the universe itself. This is the theory as it says in the beginning. So the idea, the current materialist idea, is that the brain dies, consciousness ceases to exist because it is our brain which is creating everything. But things exist outside our brain, and things that our senses do not perceive exist as well. Now, all of the research is pointing towards the idea that consciousness exists. If you go into the literature, the idea is that your body does not hold consciousness, or let's call it soul, but rather the soul holds the body. The consciousness holds the body and everything. So it is not inside you, it's everywhere, and you're like in it. That's the common idea. So now when you go into the research on either experiences and out-of-body experiences, so on and so forth, psychedelics, you see that people start having these out-of-body experiences, and especially in the research on near-death experiences, where people are saying things like, I was outside of my body, I saw the emergency room where I was in, or whatever hospital I was in, I saw the people around, I saw what they were wearing, I saw what they were doing, I could hear their thoughts, things of that nature, and they could see the perspective through the roof, and they went through the roof, and so on and so forth. They're not longer in the body, so there's something else. The idea of gaining and heighten this sort of consciousness where they can hear things far away from them, where they can just travel at the speed of thought, and then they have these transcendental experiences where they go into different realms and they see lights and they see a lot of things. I've gone into it. This is a different topic, but it's sort of the same. It seems that we are not our bodies. So the idea is that when people die, instead of consciousness ceasing to exist, they gain a heightened consciousness, which is also what happens with psychedelics and in out-of-body experiences. Now, what the research is doing is looking at it into a more pragmatic way and putting it out there. This is something real. This is a real phenomenon, as I said in that consensus statement for the future of near-death experience. Hundreds of millions of reports saying the same thing. So we have to start to take this seriously, and we have to look into the implications of it. Alright, goes on. What's more, according to Fenwick, our consciousness tricks us into perceiving a false duality of self and other, when in fact there is only unity, there's only one, there's only this larger consciousness, but we are trapped into this duality, just perceiving ourselves. Now this little paragraph here, the implications is, why is this happening? Why are we individuals? Why is the process of individualization? Is there a purpose to life? Is there a purpose to the whole thing? What are we doing here? Is there intelligent design behind it? Did it just happen? This is one of the questions that some the research, and more than the research, the philosophy, which is something that I'm working in. This is why I have this playlist, pragmatic philosophy, and I've been writing on it, and I'm going to be coming with a new book really shortly, and it talks about this. It's about landing all of this and asking the question, is there a purpose to it? What exactly is the purpose? Now I go a little bit into, I made a video about it. There's a purpose to life. There seems to be a purpose. If there's a very organized recognized process of dying. When people go and they see their live review and they realize things and so on and so forth, there's gotta be a purpose to it. Now, a lot of people struggle with this because, at the same time, the purpose could only be whatever you want it to be, and there could be no purpose at all. A lot of people come to the conclusion when they go into the whole literature that there's no purpose. We are just living and trying to have experiences and have fun in the earthly realm, as some people call it. Some people think it's a school and so on and so forth. Whatever the purpose is, it could be either. There could be no purpose, you could have your own purpose, but it seems that there is some sort of a purpose into it, and it would only make sense because there's a process. If there's a process, there's gotta be a product, a purpose. I go into this part of the philosophy on it, and I'm gonna be building upon this. So this is interesting right here. We transcend the human experience of consciousness and its illusion of duality. When we die, we transcend the human experience of consciousness and its illusion of duality and merge with the universe's entire and unified property of consciousness. So ironically, only in death can we be fully conscious. It ties with that idea that when people go into these near-death experiences, into the out-of-body experience, into the breakthrough psychedelic experience with MEO, DMT, and so on and so forth, and they see this heightened consciousness, and they can move at the speed of thought. Some people say that they can create their own heaven. Some people say that they can travel in time, and so on and so forth. That's when the heightened consciousness, the actual consciousness we seem to be, what the research is pointing towards, is really who we are. This duality, this brain filter is for a purpose, is some sort of exercise, some sort of game. I talked about this in a video where some people are coming to the conclusion that we are larger entities. People call it the higher self, the ultimate soul. There's a lot of ways that the literature and the mythology and some of the philosophies have looked at this and tried to put labels on this, but it seems that this is what we are. We are larger sort of beings playing a game of life. I'm gonna link that somewhere on the screen. Alright, so the next part of this, how it ends with a little, the tree falls, it happens, so on and so forth. But one of the final conclusions that this article, which was written in 2019, goes is like, no, we don't have evidence on this. This is not to be taken as joining God or a creator, because the cosmic consciousness that Fenwick describes did not create the universe, but it's simply a property of it. So this is interesting as well. This is something that is happening. As I said, there's the scientific consensus statement, and this is what is happening in hundreds of millions of reports. This seems to be a real thing. People go into this a different realm. They go outside of the body. Out-of-body experiences are a real thing. We have to look at it pragmatically. Does this mean they join God? It seems to be an option. A lot of people talk about the light. A lot of people talk about, even through the psychedelic experience, joining everything at the same time and just downloading this, being in the presence of something much larger than them. The actual reports are complicated and very extensive, and I'm going to be looking into those in the future. But if you just Google some of the reports and just read 5, 10, 20, 100 of them, you'll realize that what's happening in these reports and these experiences is quite wild, and a lot of people have this option of joining a source or a creator of what they would call God. But at the same time, there seems to be a realm that is non-physical, that is all connected, and is what ancient philosophies called the Bill of Maya, or the Atman, or the Brahman, or the Spirit, or the Holy Spirit, or the Kingdom of God, or whatever name you want to give it. There's something outside of the body, and it's all connected. We're starting to look into it, and we're starting to form hypotheses on it. But now the biggest question, which is what comes forward, is there evidence on this? Obviously, despite his impressive body of research into this subject, there is not currently a way to empirically establish the validity of Fenwick's cosmic consciousness hypothesis. That's a good name for it. Cosmic consciousness hypothesis. Now, there's this other theory, a scientific theory of the soul. I called the video that I made on it of the Orquart theory, and it's saying the same thing, that when we die, the quantum information within the microtubules in our brain releases into the larger consciousness. So we acquire all this information, we store it, and then all of this information, our ego releases into the into the cosmos, if you may, into the universe, into the larger consciousness. Now, this is a theory made by an anesthesiologist named Stuart Hameroff and a quantum physics expert and mathematician named Roger Penrose. I'm going to link it somewhere on the screen. This is one of the strongest theories on consciousness, and they are all saying the same thing. And these are people who have been studying in the medical fields or in their fields for like 50 plus years, and this is the conclusions that they are gathering. So now this ends. There is no current way to empirically establish the validity of Fenwick's cosmic consciousness hypothesis. Thus, it seems that the answer to the question in this post's title is no. There is no empirically established explanatory framework for understanding how consciousness can exist independently and outside of the brain. All right, so this is the big question. This is the big problem here. Is so this research, as I said, this article goes into, ultimately it aligns more with faith than science. Thus, it seems the answer to the question in this post's title is no. There is no empirically established explanatory framework. Framework is an important word for understanding how consciousness can exist independently and outside of the brain. Now, is this true in 2022? I don't think so. Maybe empirically, this is complicated. This is really complicated because we cannot empirically prove it. But is there a framework? Is there an explanatory framework? I think there is an explanatory framework to understand it. I think we can understand it, and this is because we have research today. As I said, if you go into some of the latest research here and the guidelines for the consensus statement for the future research of near-death experiences, they point out the five things that come often in the research, and this is people traveling to different worlds, the life experience. This is hundreds of millions of reports. Despite that, no one can empirically just kill themselves and go there. The fact that we have all these reports tells us something. And I think the most important part of one of the biggest parts of the research is psychedelic research, because this is something that and Big Pharma is looking into it. I'm gonna link it somewhere on the screen. Big Pharma is looking into it, and they're acknowledging that there are these quote unquote entities that exist somewhere. Now the question is, are they part of our brain or they're somewhere else? So if the theory and the hypothesis here that we leave our brain filter into the larger consciousness, and then we realize that in this quote unquote larger consciousness there exists different realms, different, we can call them dimensions as well, I guess, and different quote unquote entities, which people are calling perhaps gods or demigods or just entities or elves or mechanicals or whatever they are. The question and what a lot of people disregard about psychedelics is just a hallucination, it's just nonsense. But if we actually live into a larger consciousness, maybe it's not hallucination. Maybe people go into these places that exist not in their brain filter, not in the ego filter, which is what the research is pointing towards, but rather in the larger consciousness field, the cosmic consciousness people are calling it. So then everything aligns, and what the research is saying, psychedelics aligns. And now the most important part of the research that I'm going to be looking into the future, and I think is what starts differentiating whether we have empirically based data or not, is some of the research from Christopher Timmerman, some other people at the Imperial College in London, which I made a video about, and this is part of what the researchers are doing. And what I'm doing in this channel is I'm putting all of this information together. So I said, if you go to this playlist and go in research, all of these videos have a research, a publication, something linked at the end where we're gathering these ideas. What I want to do here is try to build a library for people to go into and look at the actual research. So now this, one of my previous videos, the connection between brainwaves and the mysteries of the universe, I talk about the research from Christopher Timmerman, where he goes into the idea that when people are having this quote unquote breakthrough experience, people go into the delta and theta brainwaves. Well, these are the slowest brainwaves. These are where we're tied with deep states of meditation or what people are calling quote-unquote dreamless sleep, like the slowest the brain activity that a human can have is where people are having the most impactful experiences in psychedelics. They meet God, they go and meet the aliens, and they download all this information about the universe, so on and so forth. So there's very little brain activity when this happens. So what does this tell us? Is the brain creating it? Or perhaps what these psychedelic substances do is remove the brain filter and even partially allow people to go into this larger consciousness that Peter Fenwick is talking about. And when they go into this larger consciousness, they meet entities, they go through realms, they have a heightened consciousness. The research is lining up. This seems to be what's happening. When people die, when people go out of body, when people go into the psychedelic experience, they remove the brain filter into the larger consciousness. And now, is there no science? Is there not a framework? There is a framework. Go look into the ORCOR theory. Go Google Tom Campbell. I haven't even talked about Tom Campbell in this channel. And I'm going to be looking into the future, his big theory of everything. Just Google Tom Campbell, big theory of everything. He used to be a NASA scientist that then was working with the Monroe Institute. And if you go into this playlist that I'm talking about and go into research and consciousness in the mainstream, where I talk about a TikToker who's looking into some of the government agencies, leaked reports and documents on the idea that the universe is a hologram and we have access to places out of our body, and talks about the Gateway project from the Monroe Institute and Robert Monroe, and how they made it so they could go out of body at will. Now, this here talks about, do we have empirically established explanatory framework? Go into the Monroe Institute and look at the Gateway Project. Look into this video and the content of the video, the actual documents that are talked about here. People were doing this at will. And they found the same results over and over. And this is where Tom Campbell was working with. So we do have the evidence. It's just that all this evidence is so new, it's so recent, that people are barely beginning to understand it, barely beginning to take it seriously. And as this type of articles and this type of research still goes on, we're barely beginning to understand. But I think we do have a framework to understand the fact that consciousness might not be located in the brain, but rather that brain is a filter, and there is a larger consciousness that science, philosophy, and every one of us is barely starting to understand. If you're on the path of finding the truth about reality and our purpose as humans on Earth, the information that I have to share concerns you. After a lifetime of research in philosophies ranging from Buddhism to the occult, I've encountered themes and patterns along some baffling information that is beginning to be seriously studied by science. A Rational Divine Outline, The Ghost of Jesus, is the first iteration of this project, where I analyze the message of Jesus without dogmatism, fanaticism, or religious bias. You can find my work available on Amazon on the link below. If you find this work valuable, consider subscribing, sharing, and following me on social media, as it'll help others in the same path to find this information. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.